Hi guys, Valky here. It is March 28th, 2025, and Smougate has just dropped the developer notes for another wave of buffs. My only preface for this wave of buffs is that usually we flame Smougate for being terrible at balancing, but especially around the strongest units in the game. It feels like when a unit is good, such as Death Dealer Ray, it takes them a long time to respond with characters that are good versus him. And I think they're doing something a little different. You know, maybe they're admitting that they're not good at balancing, so they're just going to make a bunch of fun buffs that aim to upset the balance in the game. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let us begin going into them. First up is Martial Artist Ken. This one is really simple. He will now always attack in a critical hit, no matter what happens. His damage got a bump across the board, and S1 is more damage. The S2, when he counters, will hit a little bit harder. A lot of people don't really know why this buff is here, and I will say this. If you played any amount of RTA in the past season, one really popular draft is Veronica and Eligos Cleave. Having Martial Artist Ken always critically strike will be able to just knock out Veronica and knock out Eligos. So now, if you're playing the style of Cleave, one thing you need to be really cognizant of is, against a Martial Artist Ken, if you're not banning him, your character, one, needs to be on immunity set to avoid the provoke, because it's a 100% chance to provoke, and you need to have a little bit of bulk to survive the counterattack, otherwise you might just get blown up. Very simple. Now, the one buff everybody is looking for is the Fallen Cecilia buff. They are changing three things about her. Her S1 now gets the Soul Burn to ignore effect resistance. The big one, her passive, now decreases additional damage and fixed damage received by allies by 50%. When more than one damage reduction effect is granted, only the strongest effect is applied. So she's still going to be an Aureus Knight, but this effect, and we all knew this was coming because everything that is really OP in Epic 7 eventually receives a hard counter. So if you're fighting a 3F Bellion, now that damage is reduced. Young Senya damage, cut in half. Uberiath Tooth Payra, which has kind of been a terror in RTA recently, reduced. But more importantly, Urban Shadow Shoe and Inheritor Amiki will have their damage cut down an insane amount. Another big one is now it will dispel all debuffs on Fallen Cecilia herself and transfer them to the entire enemy team. It'll have a lower cooldown, but also give a little bit more souls. On paper, you're going to think the S3 is huge, the S2 is pretty cool, and the S1 is whatever. But in reality, I think the S2, the passive, that decreases additional damage. You know, you're holding back stuff like Uberia's Tooth, you're holding back stuff like Urban Shadow Shoe and Amiki damage. That is going to be the biggest thing that will be changing the game. Now, the next thing I think is important is going to be the Soul Burn effect. Ignore resistance. Why does this matter? As I highlighted earlier, the biggest thing about Fallen Cecilia is whenever you play her, you are extending the length of your match. You're making the match last a lot longer. And when you make a match last a lot longer, there's going to be opportunity for skill expressions such that you are soul burning to maybe provoke an Amiki out of her S3. That is huge. Provoke a ER Bloodblade Corinne out of her big turn. That is enormous. I cannot highlight how important this actually is. Ignore effect resistant soul burn for 10 souls on a hard crowd control skill, which is a provoke, is huge. Now the S3, I think is going to be a neat skill. You know, it's not going to be a skill that changes games every single time you get this button up, right? Sometimes you're just going to be clicking it for that skill nullifier, but the big thing is you cannot use it to dispel stuns, silence, sleep, right? You're still going to run into issues facing those effects. So hard crowd control will still be her father. But the biggest thing now is that you will almost always be able to punish these openers, right? So if you think about really strong openers right now, Lone Wolf Payra, New Moon Luna, and you got stuff like Sea Phantom Politis, all of them kind of drop really annoying debuffs, right? If you think about the Seal, the Unbuffable, the defense breaks, all of that can just now be shot back with FCC. A Fallen Cecilia, I feel like really put herself in a position where she is just the default knight in the game once again, and I'm really happy for her. I don't like characters whose sole purpose is to just extend the length of the game, but I would have to admit, this does change, the power structure, the power balance in RTA, so to speak. Very good buff. Coming up next, this is actually a buff I'm kind of scared of, Eye Celine. Because she gets two things. One, if she gets any buffs and she attacks, now she gets the upgraded version of her auto attack. And now her auto attack also gives attack buff to her for 1 turn when she hits. That gives her pretty much a 50% damage output boost. That's very significant. On top of that, it dispels all debuffs from allies whenever she uses her ultimate, which is, the big thing where she opens the gate, revives all her allies. That is really huge because a lot of times, if she only cleanses herself, her allies, if they have the unbuffable effect, can't just be denied the immortality, and a lot of times she can just be outplayed. But I think this actually opens up her potential in a effect resistance composition as an ER carry. I actually think she's really scary in an ER comp now, mostly because of this S3 effect. I think any character who can dispel all debuffs is worth investing ER onto. And usually you don't want to invest ER on a squishy character who really wants the damage, but now she gets free attack buff. So you have all the gear score in the world to divest your build and make a good ER build for her. I'm really scared what the ER players are going to be cooking out with Eye Celine, because before they're going to be annoying, now they're going to be a threat. Up next is Sylvan Sage Vivian. This one looks pretty scary, but I feel like most of the time she'll be alright, and what the change is now her S1, instead of giving a speed buff, its CR increased by 15%. And you're gonna say like, hey, wait a minute, speed buff is 30%. Aren't I getting scammed? Well, no. If you attack on her turn and her focus is full, she's just going to hit twice, which is boost by 30%. She's going to be stacking 40% attack instead, and it's just going to be hurting a whole lot. And another really big thing is her S3 now reduces cooldown of all allies by a turn. It got bumped up to 5 turns, but she's going to reduce it by a turn and give her a focus. So honestly, it is a huge net positive, and that gives two things. One, you can now play her into cooldown reset characters. That's going to be really annoying you. And two, she can now have high synergy with characters who really like the cooldown reduction, like Hellion Lua, which, oh man, Hellion Lua loves getting her cooldown reduced, and she just does so much damage and gives so much value over turns. But I think Sylvan Sage Vivian herself still won't be like a meta-dominant character. One, she's really relying on focus. Focus characters are always scared to see Phantom Politis, Solitaria, yada yada, right? And Sylvan Sage Vivian herself could just get one-shotted by Bystander Hua-Young. It bypasses this passive completely. So she's going to be a interesting character that you can take into like high tempo compositions, which is like you take first turn and then you try to just kill your opponent, right? Like aggro or cleave, right? You want to take all of your turns before your opponent gets to play the game, because she does have a lot of counterplay. After that, you have Dragon King Sharun. The buffs for her are pretty simple to understand. Now, instead of dispelling whenever she takes a turn, right, she's usually drafted to counterplay sleep, stuns, and fear, like with Mort. Now, instead of 30% combat readiness, she'll now gain 40% combat readiness to steal the turn. And instead of cleansing on her turn, which, your opponent always has room to counterplay you and play around her turn economy, it now works anytime. That's nice. Cascade also got increased to deal 4,000 fixed damage to the target. That, honestly, instead of being a Dragon King Sharun buff, feels more like a Tori buff. And with her being pretty dominant in the metagame right now, I would just say even me today, I played like about 20 to 30 matches. There were 3 games where I missed lethal on my opponent because my Tori missed kill by less than 1,500 damage. So if this buff was live right now, I would actually be up something like 40 RTA points, right? That would have been plus 13 each for 3 games. That's not nothing. That's actually pretty significant. I would love that buff. And of course, the ultimate also inflicts cannot buff, which is an additional debuff. So versus things like Ambitious Tywin, that class debuff, so in his case, defense break and defense break against his allies will now just be able to stick. She also got a cool constellation change as well. Basically, to give you guys the short of it, it increases her speed and effectiveness, which plays into her role of being a debuffing Soul Weaver, but it does take away 100 base defense from her, so instead of, you know, being kind of bulky and slow as a debuffer, she's going to be a bit more lighter on her feet, but that will result in her getting one-shotted just a little bit more. Okay, now this one, this is the goat of the patch, at least in my opinion. Lidica gets a full rework. The TLDR of it is just, she's basically Faithless Lidica, but plus 12 base speed, which is huge because with a speed set that's like 16 speed, and she doesn't need a critical hit chance necklace. So red and green Lidica Cleave next season is gonna go crazy. But the reason why that is, well, let's see. Her S1 now is a bleed and then detonate a bleed. Doesn't really matter. The S2, this is where it gets really crazy. It inflicts resource strain on all enemy by 60% before attacking, decrease buff duration, right? So now you can strip things like Red Flan, strip the immunity, right? Their turn 1 immunity is now gone. And then inflict bind. So things like Navy Captain Landy cannot counterattack you. And for everything you hit, you get 25% CR. So versus a full team of 4 characters, she is immediately going to take an extra turn if you don't pick something like an Abyssal Euphine or a Ret Politis to counter her. The crazy part is you can burn 20 souls to ignore effect resistance, so you can always take away that turn 1 immunity, and on top of that, inflict bind. So you lock out counter attacks and you lock out dual attacks, which is going to be really, really sticky. And the thing that's going to really push it over the edge is now you can inflict restrict on all enemy for 2 turns. So things like Empyrean Ilanav will now not be able to just immediately cut to the top, and if you do manage to tag onto characters like Sage Ball, they won't be able to interrupt your combo as well. So it's just a lot packed in for 20 souls to ignore effect resistance. The Ultima got a pretty nifty buff as well. It lost the strip, so now that one's on the S2, but you now gain a defense break for 2 turns, and then you push them to the bottom of the CR bar. On top of that, if you're hitting somebody who is binded, and don't forget guys, the bind you can soul burn to ignore ER, so you're guaranteed to land it. If you play very aggressively, you draft your books, you can now give your allies a layer of skill nullifier. So they literally turn Lidica into Faithless Lidica, but way better. So that cleave is 100% coming back next season. The only saving grace from just being run over by this composition is the fact that there are a lot of blue units in the metagame right now, so you can hopefully just count on a miss. You know, I don't like doing that because, you know, 50% of the chance for your strategy to work is not something I like, but at the end of the day, they wanted to change things up for next season, so change is here. This is going to be Faithless Lidica, but better. Up next is Kayron. They basically buffed his damage across the board, so damage is up, soul burn damage is up, and his S3 will now heal him a little bit. Great. I guess the really cool thing is his passive evasion is now increased to 2 turns. Damage is dealt, increased, and also now his imprint has changed to critical hit chance. I mean, I guess it's like an okay buff. It doesn't really do anything because right now his biggest issue is just, one, he's relying on immortality, which can just get blown up by Veronica. You know, it's a character that's kind of everywhere, right? You pick Kayron to counter cleaves, and then, well, if you're going to run into Veronica anyway, why don't you just pick, like, Amiki? And the Amiki has a chance where when the Veronica's taking her extra turn, you're just going to provoke her out of her extra turn and then blow up the Veronica and then blow up the Cleaver, right? I think Amaki's just a better character right now. I don't really think there's a point to play Kayron. After that, I actually think this is a pretty nice buff. So Seaside Bellona, for every surviving ally, decrease damage suffered by 10%. So instead of a flat 30% damage transfer, it's a, I'm assuming it doesn't count herself, right? If it counts herself, that'd be really nice. So it'll be a 30, maybe 40% damage reduction. So you can play her with things like Blue Crow or even just an Aureus. And her defense break chance got bumped up to 75%, which is just nice. Like, we like defense break. Defense break, niftiest debuff in the game. That's cool. Her ultimate now dispels all buffs. So, I mean, it's what? It's an AoE attack. It's strips all buffs, applies unhealable, unbuffable. Whew, boy. I feel like right now she has kind of have this like really nice niche versus either red units in a Cleaver aggro draft, or she's being played for a counter attacker against, you know, low burst damage debuff compositions, and I feel like she does decent there, and this definitely makes her better. Before, you kind of need to land a critical hit to deal the increased damage, but now they just buff the damage up across the board, and especially because they're buffing her artifact, Reingar's Specialty Drink, right? Additional damage amount increase. I think their goal is to turn her into something like a 3F Bellion situation. You just let her kind of go crazy with a lot of bulk, base speed, super high attack, so that when she hits back, that extra tick damage is just going to hurt. I feel like that's probably something they've been eyeballing for a while, but they were just scared to pull the trigger on the buff because it might just take over the game. So with Fallen Cecilia having this passive, this might just be something they're really comfortable thinking about. So that might become a new line that could be played. After that, Lethe, this one, I feel pretty iffy about this one. She gets 50% combat readiness every time she tentacles someone. The damage increase, I don't think this is for the tentacle. This is just for the S1, that little dinky hit she does with her sword. And she heals scaling to her own HP. So she heals a bit more and she gets more snowball potential in the drafts where she's good. The problem with her, though, is good Lethe drafts are rare and few in between. You get maybe like one good game of Lethe every like 50 matches you play, because injury is everywhere, which hurts her a lot, hurts her damage, hurts her survivability, and penetration resistance is kind of common now after the DM buff. So not really something you want to opt to, but I guess if you're a Guild War player, she's like a pretty consistent win condition, but other than that, I can't imagine her being too good. Destina is up next as the next RGB5. S1's healing is just bumped up across the board, and her unique buff, which gives her 60 effect resistance, has been extended to 3 turns. That's really nice, you know, not much to say about it. But I think the really big buff is actually hidden here. Her S3 now has a 4-turn cooldown instead of 5-turn, and it revives all dead allies up to 30% health. The reason why I think this is the most significant part about playing Destina is a lot of times, if you're playing Destina in an RTA setting, what she's going to be doing is you pick her when you know your opponent is packing a lot of damage, your units are going to die, so you're trying to line up one good turn where you click S3, bring all your units back, and then with that turn, you run the enemy over. And a lot of times, you might have to even do that twice, so she's dropping her S2 on herself a lot. The fact that now her S3 cooldown is reduced to 4 turns just makes that strategy way more reliable. And I think especially with ways we can deny revives in the game, a la Briarwitch Iceria and Sinful Angelica, this is probably a balanced change. But if this was here like a year and a half ago, back when she was like the default revive unit, you know, before Blood Moon Haze buff, this would have been considered crazy OP. I mean, 4 turns is crazy. Okay, after that we have Green Landy. I think her buff is super simple. S1 damage increase. I mean, it's nice, not much to say. And her passive now gives her 1 turn stealth. This is going to matter a lot with her own artifact. So let's just talk about them together. Her artifact now gives her greater attack buff at a 6 to 12% chance clip. So what that means roughly is if your opponent starts the fight with like a protection set and immunity, you're basically guaranteed greater attack buff on the first turn. And then immediately after you go, you know, provided you have a maxed out copy, you'll just get stealth for the next whole turn. Dude, this is like a change I've been asking for Guiding Light for years. So basically Wall of Order is just a better Guiding Light if you don't need to be stealth on the first turn. And guess what? Landy now gives herself stealth on the first turn, so it's really just something that works for her. And now I think she's kind of a terror punishing high buff compositions, and we talked about this earlier, right? Even though she doesn't have a good matchup herself versus Tori, she can punish all of the good support units that Tori ideally wants to play with. So now, I think if you play a high speed, high damage Green Landy, she's just going to be able to run over a lot of slower compositions that don't respect her power. Watch a Schuri. This one's really simple. Pre-awakened S3 we don't really care about, but post-awakened S3 he now gains 50% hit chance, and then his exclusive equipment gives another 50% hit chance. This just means regardless of what you're playing, you can now take him, you know, Guild War, Arena, even RTA, and just one shitter ditter a afternoon soak flan. Excellent. So if she's been a problem unit for you, you're having a hard time into her, now you get a default solution. Yay. And then, you know, we already talked about the artifact. Reingar specialty drink kind of makes SSB just a brute force, no crit attack monster. Wall of Order Landy is kind of like an intriguing build. I don't imagine it'll be too popular. You know, Fighting Spirit, after all, is still hampered by Sea Phantom Politis, which is kind of everywhere. But Fairytale for a Nightmare is also receiving a buff. Now, the chance of stripping the buff got bumped up to 80%, so it scales upwards, and the fixed damage is now scaled to 2,000. So the damage got bumped, but if you only have a plus 15 copy, you now have a slightly lower chance to... Actually, no, a plus 15 copy should still be 60%. So they're not really punishing, like, if you're like a free-to-play player. So that's pretty nice of them. And you're just dealing more fixed damage over time. And funnily enough, anecdotal evidence, guys. I played a match today where I was playing Solitaria versus somebody's Laya, and they lived by 468 HP. So if I had this upgraded version of Fairytale for a Nightmare, like, so if I was playing this patch, like all the matches I played today on the next patch, I would actually be up 4 matches today, which, good to know, good to know. This actually changes things. You know what I mean, guys? Because that, I think, is pretty much what we all want out of a balance patch, is make impactful changes, right? Make fun changes. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say some of these changes are the most balanced things I've ever seen, especially like the FCC one or the Fire Lidica one, but they're going to be impactful. So if you have these units, congratulations, you got some more toys to play with, and if you don't, well, now you know what to keep an eye out for, should any of these units have a rerun, and Smougate always reruns a lot of these buff units, so keep an eye out. Anyways, that's going to be it from me. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like and a subscribe. It is like 4 AM here, so I'll see you guys in the next video. Once I come back, plan on running a whole ass series. Alright, have a great one, guys. See ya.